It is March 14th, 2025, and the Trump administration has officially delivered its plan for a 30-day ceasefire to the Russian government as Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, made a special trip to Moscow where the Kremlin said that he met directly with Putin. We haven't heard too much since then, but it has been very interesting to watch the way that things have unfolded this week, to watch the fact that while all of the Western world, specifically the Trump administration, some of their allies, maybe not so allies in Europe, were watching and waiting for Putin to turn down the ceasefire offer, right? For him to say, no, we will not do a 30-day ceasefire. Technically, he didn't say that. He said they'd love to have a ceasefire, but there are a lot of different preconditions we have to talk about first. And rightfully so. This is a very complicated conflict. We don't get to just pause it overnight. Oh, and if there is a pause, we need to talk about what Kiev is going to be up to for those 30 days. A conversation that the West doesn't exactly want to have because I'm sure that they have plenty of plans for Kiev, which also include the latest escalations on behalf of the Trump administration and the things they are doing behind the scenes related to sanctions against Russia and weapons deliveries for Ukraine that are kind of being quietly mentioned in the media. We got into all of the latest with the special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, it has been quite a busy week this week, so I'm looking forward to getting into all of the latest with you. And I want to start off with what we heard from Russian President Putin, because he responded publicly for the first time on Thursday to this U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. And he didn't give it an outright no, but he kind of gave a very diplomatic version of a no, noting that Russia is all for resolving the conflict peacefully. And he then went on to note all of the different preconditions that would be needed for an agreement to be made. So, how do you view his response? Was that about what you expected?
Are you familiar with the African American comedic duo from the United States, Key and Peele?
I am, yes.
Yes. Okay, so I think they're funny. They used to have a show together on Comedy Central, I believe, and there was a couple of skits that involved President Obama's anger management translator.
Mm-hmm.
Where Obama would say one thing and then the translator would translate it into real person speak, right? So Putin, thanked Trump effusively for his, service, his attention, and doing what he can to bring the conflict to an end, and says it's a great idea. He's fully behind the idea of a ceasefire. And he just has a few questions, just some questions, right? Let me see if I can be Putin's anger management translator. Hey, you con artist, real estate fuck! Not only no, but hell no. Right? That's what Putin actually said, right? Of course, he didn't say it that way. He started raising questions about the. First of all, he said the first thing is there are now several thousand Kiev regime troops that invaded Kursk who are now completely surrounded, and many of them have they've been involved. This isn't being reported in the Western media at all, of course, but they've been involved in lots of war crimes against the civilian population. They were killing in a lot of these places. They were just killing all men. Some places they killed women and so forth. And they're compiling lots of evidence. And I've seen enough of it to be satisfied that it was more than an occasional. So there might be hundreds of dead. But he said, what are we supposed to do? Just let them go? Should we just, let them go after they've committed all these crimes? And then he raised also questions, and what's to be done during these 30 days, right? Is the Kiev regime going to continue their mass forced conscription, right? Are they going to continue to receive armaments from the West? Is martial law in Ukraine going to continue? And then this is a huge contact line. Who's going to monitor it? How will it be enforced? Right? All of the basic things. And what he said, let me turn on anger management translator mode. You American idiots really don't know what you're doing with this. You present me with this half-baked shit, right? Pass it off as a real ceasefire plan. When was the last time you guys actually did any diplomacy, right? That's what it was, and we had more upfront and frank comments earlier in the day from Yuri Ushakov, whom is Putin's top and very close foreign policy advisor, who, by the way, represented Russia in Riyadh, kind of the rough equivalent of Mike Waltz as the national security advisor. And Lavrov also made some comments, and they clearly reiterated once again that Russia's not interested in any ceasefire, that they're only interested in it in if it's part of a long range settlement. And they reiterated the conditions in detail that Putin laid out already last June, of what Russia would require for a ceasefire, including the Kiev regime withdrawing all of their troops from what they have left in the Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, and a public commitment that they intended to change return their constitution to what it was before the West-backed Maidan Putsch in 2014, where neutrality was enshrined in their constitution, and a few other conditions as well before Russia would consider a ceasefire. So what Putin is doing is he could tell. I mean, you saw the statements from Trump, and you saw that every Western leader, like parrots, squawked and repeated the same thing. The ball's now in Russia's court. The ball's now in Russia's court. The ball's now in Russia's court, right? You heard this from every European leader, playing their role. A week ago, they were all warmongering and a war summit. We're going to spend $850 billion on weapons, and we're going to rearm Europe, and we're going to retake Ukraine. And the prime minister of Denmark said, war is better than peace. And this was, now it's all like, yeah, ceasefire is a great idea. They all got in line behind this because they saw this presented as an opportunity, right, to present Russia, when they inevitably said no, as the obstacle to peace. And then the pressure on some of Russia's trading allies. China wouldn't care. But on probably India and Brazil and other countries that might be more susceptible, saying, look, okay, what Biden did was Biden, but we want to end this war. Can you please help us? Blah, blah, blah. And, go through this whole, diplomatic pillaring of Russia as the one who doesn't want peace. Well, Putin has deflected that, if you want to say, bounced the ball back into the Western court by saying, yes, a ceasefire is a great idea. We just need some discussion and guarantee. See, here's the problem, is you worked this all out with Ukraine beforehand, and you didn't even talk to us. And we have, some constructive questions about how this, and basically they're saying, they're pointing out the absolute impossibility of this ceasefire, right? They're pointing out how ridiculous the at least the ceasefire on paper that Trump was presented in the media. If there's more to it that Witkoff presented to Putin, obviously that didn't convince him later in the evening either. So right now Russia is playing a game. What they're trying to do is they're saying, yes, we're saying no to a ceasefire. But what they're doing is trying to use that discussion, like, okay, well, let's talk about a ceasefire, and draw the Trump administration into real negotiations of substance on a final settlement of the Ukraine issue. Now, whether that will work or not, no, I mean, ultimately, I don't believe that settlement is possible, that it will have to be finished on the battlefield. But Russia, even in that case, is interested in the talks as improving U.S. Russian bilateral relations, because it is wrong that the two biggest nuclear armed countries in the world haven't talked to each other for 3 years. And also, I think there's a little bit of mischief there, because the Europeans go absolutely apoplectic every time
Yeah.
Trump talks to Putin. So they're helping exacerbate tensions. I think Putin is by being willing to talk to Trump. And Trump keeps saying he wants to talk to Putin. He wants to meet with him. Now, the Russian side has previously said, well, there's a lot of groundwork that has to be done. Like, things have to be set up, right? We can't just meet and, hash this out like it's a New York real estate deal. This is high diplomacy and geopolitics. And the leaders meet at the end when something is actually agreed on. But Trump seems to be under the illusion that, we can just meet and we'll do this alpha dog hand dog shake where I'll try to break his arm and then he'll roll over and agree to whatever I say, like he does with Macron or Zelensky or anyone else. In fact, that whole scenario, that whole fracas in the White House a week ago, we heard from no less than Caroline Leavitt, Trump's spokeswoman, that the way they see it, the whole withdrawing of military and intelligence, supposedly for a few days, was simply to put Zelensky in his place. And that's what they did. Zelensky rolled over, showed his belly, and properly submitted to the alpha dog, right? Now he's in line, and he agreed to the ceasefire. And the goal, again, all of it was to paint Russia as saying no as the obstacle to peace. And if Russia really did say yes, well, then they'd have 30 days to rearm and for the Kiev regime to conscript and train up more troops and recover from the crumbling of their some of their best military forces in Kursk, and the surrounding of several more up there, and other problems all along most of the front line. That's the situation as it stands with the ceasefire right now. Russia is not going to agree to a ceasefire, but they're not going to come out and say it. They're going to simply make clear that it is impossible, while trying to draw the Trump administration into further talks.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the way that Putin started out with those comments, because I saw multiple headlines that were like, Putin agrees to a ceasefire, right? As if they just listened to the first 30 seconds.
Did that. RT did that.
Of like
and I'm
what
like,
he had to say.
No.
And I go, wait a second, he did? And then I get on and I listen to the full 7-8 minutes of what he had to say specifically on that topic. And exactly as you noted there, he's like, yeah, sure, we'd love to end this conflict through a peaceful means, but let's talk about what that actually looks like, right? We can't just decide, like Rubio's dream of we have a ceasefire with no preconditions is not remotely realistic when you're talking about how long this contact line is, the situation in Kursk, and everything else that plays into it. And the really important point that Putin brought up there was, okay, let's say we come to this agreement, who's going to enforce it? Because that's been the thing that they've run up against time and time again with the Minsk Accords, is that we have this nice shiny agreement and then no one is there to enforce it when Russia is saying, hey, Kiev is violating this over and over again.
Yeah, Russia's certainly not going to accept troops from any NATO member state on the ground. And then, if not then, right, then who would, I really can't see Chinese troops or Indian troops deployed in Ukraine between Kiev regime forces and Russia. And ultimately, let's be frank, the only foreign troops that are going to be in Ukraine are Russian troops. Right? That's the way that this is going to end. Right? There's not going to be allowed to be any other troops. Right? Unless you want to count the fictional, I can see North Koreans.
I was going to say, what about the North Koreans? They've made a comeback.
They're still playing. Yeah, they all went home. They were all defeated and they all ran away, and now they're all back again, and still not a whit of real evidence. And I'm just amazed that the Western media continues this this charade. It's very, very damning and embarrassing, and it's one of the clearest indications of what just propaganda devices they've become.
Yeah, and it's like it's almost lost its weight at this point, right? They've repeated North Korean troops in Kursk so often that people are just kind of like, okay, what do you like? What are we supposed to think about that? I guess. Now, I do want to ask you about the situation in the Kursk region because we've seen some major Russian advances there to the extent that Putin sat there and said, hey, Russia now has complete control of this region and that the remaining Ukrainian forces there are encircled and isolated. So will you take us through where things stand in Kursk? I know we've been kind of talking about it in recent weeks, building up to this point, but what do you make of the timing of everything that happened this week?
Okay, so Russia has long been using the Kursk incursion zone, which already by a couple months ago had shrunk down to, you can talk to it more accurately as the Suja pocket. And Suja is the largest urban center, town. You'd be generous to call it a town. It had 4,000 to 5,000 people. This is what a wooded backwater this Kursk region was, that the largest settlement that the Kiev regime managed to tank, and so became the center of their occupation, was 4,000 to 5,000 people. That was it, right? Which really points out the problem, because they didn't have anywhere to put troops to hide them from artillery, from drones, equipment. Where do you hide that? And it was a real bad situation for them. It started in August when the leaves were already starting to change. Then they all fell off, which made it hard to hide stuff in the forest too. It was really bad. So it had shrunk already up to about 2 months ago to really just a pocket around Suja, a lifeline coming up through Russian territory, through the N07 highway. And that was it. And about 2 months ago, Russia said, all right, we've gotten enough out of this fire bag. We've attrited so much equipment, they don't really have much left. And there's political stuff coming up. Let's roll this up. And they started shrinking and shrinking, but also moving down on both sides of the pocket to cut off the supply lines to that Suja, where Zelensky kept throwing reinforcements after reinforcements, men and equipment, because he just couldn't give this up because he had so much politically invested in it. And it didn't help. Russia slowly tightened that noose over 2 months. And they even crossed the border into the Ukrainian side and started building a bridgehead in Sumy region, right? They're where they still are, of course, and now they're going to expand that into a buffer zone. So that set the stage. The noose was nearly tight. This one highway was under complete drone and artillery control. It was a real road of death. The videos of it, I've seen estimates that some 90% of things that they were trying to send up or wounded take away were wiped out trying to get there. So it was completely unsustainable. And they couldn't use anything else because this winter has been crazy climate change in recorded history. Almost all of January was above zero. Then there was a few cold weeks below zero in February. And then after that again, it shot up to above 10 degrees Celsius, like 10 degrees above the freezing point, which means everything turned to mud, right? That's the Rasputitsa. The mud season came real early. And that means that the Kiev regime couldn't use country, mud roads or off fields to keep Suja supplied. It all just had to be on this one not in very good condition road to begin with. And certainly by this point, it was practically impassable. So on top of that, Russia had a special forces, a special military operation where for the third time in this conflict, they used a pipeline system to get troops through the Kiev regime's defensive and pop them up in their rear. And in this case, they used the particular gas pipelines that are affiliated. They're not actually part of the Druzhba pipeline network because that's oil. This is gas. But up until January, these pipelines had been full of gas that was still being sent to Europe, in particular Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, Serbia, that whole region down there. And if you'll remember, Zelensky refused to extend the transit agreement, right? Because he's going to put the screws to, well, Slovakia and to Russia the way he saw it. Now, he was cutting Ukraine off of the transit fees they were receiving this whole time, but they were perfectly willing to do that. And that's when Russia immediately saw the opportunity there. So that pipeline was shut down. They pumped it out. They pumped what gas was in it out. They filled it full of oxygen. It was 1.4 meters in diameter, which I guess is a little over, it's like 4 feet. And they managed to get, by some estimates from some of those that were involved, some 800 troops that, they put on breathers. They were in there for days waiting for the proper time because it all also had to be arranged so that things were going around them so that, they could properly take advantage of this. And when they popped up behind, evidently it took an hour and a half for the Kiev regime forces to realize what was going on and that the pipeline had been used. And at that point, it was far too late. And when they did start attacking them, all the Kiev regime forces in those to the north of where they popped out. And this was some 15 kilometers, right? Close to 9-10 miles that they transited in this dark. I mean, if you have claustrophobia, don't watch these videos. I'll tell you that. And this is the third time because it happened first in Avdiivka and then in Toretsk, and the Kiev regime doesn't learn their lesson. And ironically enough, in a James Bond movie, The Living Daylights, with Timothy Dalton, Timothy Dalton used this gas pipeline network to get a Russian dissident, a cellist, played by Miriam Diabo. They kind of zoomed through it to get them on the other side into the west in a cleaning pod. That was what it was supposed to be in any way in the film. So even James Bond knew this plan, right? It's pretty ironic there. And the fact that Zelensky shot himself in the foot with this once again. So the Kiev regime forces, they panicked, right? They didn't know what was going on and they were afraid and they panicked. Their morale was already in a very bad situation and tanked, and they just fled. They fled. They tried to save their lives. And Russia was waiting for them to flee. And they set ambushes. There's a video out there of a bunch of Kiev regime forces trying to cross then into what was still Ukraine. Kiev regime held parts of Suja over a bridge. And this bridge had already been mined by the Kiev regime forces so that they could blow it up if they needed to retreat at some point. Well, Russia knew that and simply sent a drone into it, blew up the bridge. The Ukrainian forces trying to escape in a fairly large convoy came and found that the bridge was no longer there. They tried to back up, going the way over another bridge they had already crossed, and Russia tanked that one too. And then it was just a turkey shoot. If you feel sympathy for them, then it was cruel. By some estimates, the Russian estimates that, incredible estimates, it must be said, 90% of the Kiev regime forces that they had in those positions there in Suja and north of it either surrendered or died. And that's it. They're gone now. And there's still thousands because Russia closed the trap. They've now completely taken Suja, not just the town of Suja, and they took it in fairly good condition. They didn't have to completely destroy it because the Kiev regime is just in full retreat and crumbling at this point. And they took the whole Suja agglomerated area because it was kind of a spread out town. They had, a lot of, if you want to call suburbs of a town, not really hamlets. So all that the Kiev regime has left as of this morning, right, is 4 tiny hamlets right on the border, and Russia's going to steamroll those in no short order. They're not defendable, really. It's certainly not what they're facing. And then Putin already made clear. Putin showed up in the Kursk region to speak to Shoigu, right, and the generals who were in command of this, but also with some of the participants of that pipeline operation. And this was on the eve of the ceasefire announcement by Zelensky and Trump. And Putin showed up for the first time in this entire special military operation in a military uniform, in camos, right? Now, yes, he was close to the front lines and everything, but he's done that before. And occasionally he's put on a camouflage jacket, like right before the special military operation started, but it was still just over his suit and everything. Nope, full military camo fatigues and everything. And that is widely being read as a signal that Russia's not in a ceasefire mood, shall we say. That they're very serious about finishing this point, especially after what they've seen that the Kiev regime forces did to Russian civilians in these small towns and villages in the Kursk region. So the conflict will go on. And the Trump administration already obviously knows that Russia, whatever the words being said, oh, Trump, I want to talk to Putin. It's, he hasn't completely agreed, but, we're talking, and everything. And while all this dance is going on diplomatically, the Trump administration has already put new restrictions on Russian oil, gas, and banking sector. The fine details of what they're doing is that Biden put sanctions on Russia back in January, right before he left office. But there were 60-day exemptions on some Russian banks from these sanctions, basically so that European countries could still get the energy they needed. Well, Trump has now very quietly but very purposefully let that exemption expire without renewing it, which actually, it's going to be a lot worse for the Europeans than for the Russians. Eventually, Russia will find other buyers in the world for oil. It'll maybe take some time, right? But the Europeans are going to be scrambling because of the distribution to the market. They're going to have to bid on oil that would have been allocated to other countries, right? Pushing the prices of oil for the entire world up, some estimates, $5 a barrel in the next few weeks. Right. Again, and which Russian exports will be down for a brief time until they get distribution sorted out and find new buyers. But in the meantime, prices are going to go up. So whatever they are selling, they're going to make more money. This has been the same stupidity with sanctions on Russian commodities through the course of this conflict again and again and again. And they don't seem to get it through their heads that it doesn't really hurt Russia, because Russia has commodities that the global market needs, right? And someone will buy it. They'll get around whatever sanctions. And the other thing is also fairly quietly, the Trump administration is now sending new, improved ground-launched small-diameter bombs. Reuters reported this in the last 24. Supposedly, this new version is going to be more resistant to Russian jamming with electronic warfare. Well, we'll see about that. But this is to replace the ATACMS, which evidently the Kiev regime is completely out of, and they're hoping that these ground-launched small-diameter bombs have a range of about 100 miles, theoretically, and the U.S. should have plenty of them, because it's basically an old dumb bomb that has had rocket propulsion added to it. And it can be used from existing artillery and rocket launch systems. That's the idea behind it anyway. And the first time they sent them, already a year and a half, 2 years ago, Russian electronic warfare jam them because they're guided to target by GPS. And Russia's electronic warfare has proven extremely effective at rendering any U.S. weapon, smart U.S. weapon, into a useless hunk of metal with their electronic warfare jamming of the GPS signals. Supposedly, these ones will be more electronic warfare resistant. As an article in the Western media, I believe it was the Financial Times, possibly Wall Street Journal, put out already almost a year ago. The U.S.'s high-tech weapons work until they don't. That was the headline, because like the Borg in Star Trek, you got 3 shots with your phasers, and then their shields adapt, and you're out of luck. Resistance is futile. Well, Russian electronic warfare has proven very adept at quickly learning new Western systems, and I don't doubt that this will be the same with these new improved ground-launched small-diameter bombs as well. But for those who think that Trump is not escalating, and he's talking about, the poor dead Russians and Ukrainians, and now he's sending new and improved bombs to the Kiev regime. So
yeah, it's very telling there, the responses that we're getting. And it makes me wish that Trump of today would talk to Trump of 2 weeks ago when he's sitting there with Zelensky and he's telling him Russia's winning this war. Russia holds all of the cards right now, because it seems as though he's forgotten about that. It's a distant memory.
He just said a couple days ago, Putin has no cards.
Yeah.
Zelensky's a dictator. A few days later. Did I say that? I don't remember saying that, right? The man has, when he said that, I'm like, he can't just take that back. And I was wrong, because it just, nope, didn't happen, never repeated. And that's the way the man is. There is no trust, no veracity. He can change on a dime, and probably does every 15 minutes with whoever he talked to less, reverse his position on something. So I think increasingly Russia is already getting frustrated and dealing with him and these contradictions, and the fact that the U.S. really doesn't seem to know, there doesn't seem to be any unity in the administration. There's division, and that there's no plan of how to do this other than, for Trump to play nice with Putin, I guess, and get what they want. Well, that's not what's going to happen. That Russia will continue trying to make the diplomatic course work, but in the meantime, it's just go on the ground.
Yeah, the more time that goes, I've heard it said, and I think that this is spot on, that time is on Russia's side here, right? They are like, you know what, sure, we'll keep talking, we'll schedule meetings, whatever you want to do, we'll keep that dialogue going. But then they also keep going on the battlefield, and it'll be interesting to see what the Trump administration does next. I'm very curious to see what their next quote unquote move is here, now that, as you pointed out, they did not exactly get Putin to be in that place of saying, no, we won't do a ceasefire, so that they could.
He didn't roll over and show his belly to Trump like Zelensky did. And why would he?
Right. They've got to now figure out how to deal with that moving forward. But as always, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also catch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.